Welcome to Graphic Concrete live webinar session. Hello, I'm Bang Lee. I'm very pleased to have you all here today. Thank you for joining us today. So this live webinar consists of three parts, and this is the second part out of three. And then today you will learn about products, pricing, and design considerations. Before we begin, I'd like to mention a practical issue. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A chat. And then also all the comments are very welcome. We reserve the time to answer your question after the presentation. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Lena Wexstrom. Lena, go ahead.
Thank you, Bang. Hello, everybody. Nice of you to join us today. As Bang said, this is the second part of a three-seminar series. Some of you might have seen the first part last week, but for those who weren't here, I can say that I'm Lena Wexström and I work as a consulting architect at Graphic Concrete. I'm mostly handling projects in the United States and Canada, but also in some other regions. As I said, very nice to have you here. And today we're going to go into part two. In the first part, we'll learn about the technology and how to manufacture graphic concrete. And today we're going to learn about products, pricing, and what you need to know when you start designing your graphic concrete. I think in order to have everybody on board, I'm going to back up a little bit and just explain to you the technology and the technique so you can follow this presentation better. So this is how graphic concrete works. Let's say you have a project like a school and you would think like, oh, it would be really cool to have some graphics or something on the facade, on the panels. So you come up with this beautiful pattern with some text and something that has to do with education. You would send this to us and we would print this on a special membrane. You can see a roll here with this special membrane. We would print your design on this roll in Finland. This is all manufactured in Finland. And then this roll, this membrane would be shipped to the local precaster, wherever it would be in the world. And the precaster would then use this special membrane with the printed pattern on in their production. So now we print the membrane with your images. Here you see it comes to the factory. They would cut up the piece they need, lay down in the precast form. It's good to remember that graphic concrete is a product for precast, not for on-site casting. They would lay down the membrane in the form, and where you can see the print there on the membrane, that's a print that's a special surface retarder. And that is a chemical that would hinder the surface cement from the concrete from hardening. So even though the panel is cured and it's hard, the surface would still be soft and wet wherever this print has been touching the concrete. So they cast the concrete on top of this membrane, they let it sit. Next day, they demold and they take away the membrane. The membrane is used only once, it's disposable, so they take it off and then you can recycle it. It's basically like paper. And you can see on this panel, you can see the kind of text with a lighter gray. That's where the concrete or the soft cement surface would be. So then at the factory, they just go over the panel with a pressure washer, washing away the unset cement, revealing the aggregates that would be inside the concrete mix. So it's very simple. There you have your panel with your pattern, and it's taken to the building site. It's installed, and there it is, a beautiful graphic concrete project. So how are we going to do this one then? Let's see the types of finishes we work with. We work with the smooth form finish. That's the part where you don't expose the aggregate. That's just a smooth cement surface that you would have if you would make a panel like you would make any concrete panel. Then you have the exposed aggregate finish where we kind of wash off the surface cement. And by combining these two, you have the graphic concrete. It's partly exposed and partly smooth. But we actually have products for all these three types of surfaces. As you can see here, starting from the left, that's an empty membrane. There's no retarder on that membrane. The thing it does, it makes the concrete surface super soft and nice, almost like a velvety feel, like marble. So if you don't feel like having graphics, just a very nice smooth concrete surface, that's a product you can use. Then we have a fully exposed membrane or fully printed membrane that would make a fully exposed aggregate surface. You can use that also if you just want to expose the whole area. The most interesting part, of course, would be the membrane with the graphics, where you can see the orange color. That's where you would have your exposed aggregate, and where you don't have any print, that's where it's going to be smooth. So here's an example of the smooth concrete project. This smooth membrane is mostly used when you have a white cement. You can also use it with a gray cement or with pigmented, but this surface is so perfect, so it's very unforgiving. Whatever little color difference in tone would show. So that's why it's preferable that you would use it with just a crisp white concrete. Becomes very, very nice, as you can see. Then we have the exposed or fully exposed membrane. That's mostly used when you have a graphic concrete image on one panel, like you see here, the lady, and she has a background that is exposed aggregate. Then you have a panel next to that graphic panel that needs kind of the same background. Then it's really important to have the exact same depth of the exposure. So that panel should be made with a fully printed membrane in order to have the exact same tone. Then, of course, the pattern graphic concrete. For those who were here before, they know that whatever you can print out with a printer, we can transfer to a concrete surface. You know, it can be a flower, a stripe, or here's something imitating plaster or a text or even brick. Like with a brick, we would just print the joints of the bricks so they would be exposed aggregate and then the brick would be smooth. And in this case, they found a really nice kind of terracotta pigment, so it actually looks like a brick, exactly. We have ready-made patterns on our website. There's like 100 plus, and they are constantly changing and growing, this collection. So you can go and take a look. These are all patterns that are proven to work. You know, the scale, the line thickness, they do work with concrete. So if you're interested to know, you can go, you can use them as inspiration. You can go in and take a look, at the graphics. If you don't like to use those exactly, you are free to change them. You can add something, or you can rotate them, or maybe you would like to scale them a little bit. You can freely use this as you like. We have some projects where they kind of made like they took parts of different patterns and combined it into a new one. So you're totally free to use this as you like. There's also JPEG images available on the net, so you can, make renderings with the patterns if you want to show a client. Here you can see a pattern. This is called Textilia Nega. This is a very popular pattern. This would be like the 100% size, exactly as we have it on the website. This is made with a black aggregate and white cement. But maybe you think, well, horizontal is nice, but I would like to have a vertical stripe. So then we can also print it turned. So here you see like a vertical example of this. And this is with a lighter stone, a little not so dark, so it wouldn't be so, coming onto you. This is more like a texture. I think it's very nice. But somebody might think, oh, this is a little bit too small, this stripe. I can't really see it. So then we can also scale it bigger. Here you see an example of a horizontal pattern, but scaled up to double size if you want to have a little rougher look. So you're free to change this. This is another very popular pattern. It's called Vertex. The idea with this pattern is that it hides the vertical seams or the joints between the panels. So instead of having all the panels show like squares on the facade, the joint would kind of fall into the pattern. And it makes the panel look like to be really, really long and slim, even though actually it's made up of many shorter panels. When you do this, it's important to remember that whatever you put in the joint, the silicone, whatever you put in the joint between the panels should have the color of the aggregate in order to fall into this pattern. In the next slide, this pattern served as inspiration. As I said, you don't need to use them exactly. You can kind of come up with your own. So here the architect wanted something a little bit more vivid, so they made it a little bit curved and they add some dots. And in these projects, they made also like a positive and negative image. So they have this white where the pattern would be exposed. And then you can see down there, there's a mural when actually the background would be exposed. So that's a black background, and then the pattern would be smooth. So, you can go ahead and do whatever you like in your project. It's pretty popular to do this positive and negative images. This is how it works if you would choose our pattern. They are built up by this original image that would be a square that is 3.2 times 3.2 meters. In feet, that would be 10.5 times 10.5 foot. This square would be printed continuously on the membrane as many linear meters or linear foot that you would need for your project. This pattern, of course, it could be changed, but this is now an example of the pattern that you would take directly from our website. If you go in there, under this pattern, you would find this image. To explain to you a little bit more, on the left, you have the print proof, where there's black, that's going to be exposed aggregate, and where there's white, that's going to be a smooth cement surface. On the right, you have an image to tell you the scale of the pattern, because when you are on your computer screen, you see this little square, it's really hard to understand the scale. So that's why we put in images like this, so you can get a feel for the size of the pattern. And as I said, you can scale these patterns. Here you have the pattern on one panel, that would be the original size. But if you would think, well, this is really nice, I could use it as a piece of art, let's blow it up. We could do that. We would just make then 4 parts and you would have this blown up on 4 panels. Anything is possible. But remember that this has cost implications. Our own patterns, those are the most cost effective ones. When you start blowing up or changing them, the price changes. But as long as I can back up here a little bit here, as long as your own design would fit into this same square as we use, it's the same price as for our ready-made patterns. We don't want to have you paying more just because you are creative. So whatever you would repeat could fit in this square and we would print it as a wallpaper. It's the same price as our own patterns. But here about cost implication a little bit. If you would have one facade and you have this piece of art on the whole facade, that's the most expensive option. Then if you could use the same image even in a few copies, like maybe 4 times or something, the price already drops a lot. As you can see, if you would choose to make like a wallpaper type pattern, like our own patterns, that would be the most cost-effective option, and that would be the one here on the right. When I'm talking in euros, I think this most expensive, let's say that would be 300 euros a square meter, going down to 15 euros a square meter for the most cost-effective one. In dollars, that's like $35 a square foot, going down to under $3 a square foot. Now it's important to remember when I talk about pricing that I talk about the membrane price. The final price will always be given by the local precaster because it depends on so many things. How many panels, shape of the panels, what type of panel, insulated, not insulated, load bearing, non-load bearing, what kind of concrete mix. Do you choose a very expensive aggregate or do you use gravel? So there's so many things that plays in. So when I'm talking about price, I'm talking about the price I know, which is the membrane. Here are the pricing principles. It's good to understand this. The startup cost for printing is high, like with any printing, because we are actually printing. But when you start copying, the price goes down per square foot or square meter. So also the larger amount of whatever you have, the more you repeat, the price becomes more cost effective per square foot or square meter. But the amount of retarder printed on the membrane does not affect the price. If it's a stripe or a flower or a dot, that's no difference. It's comparable to making a business card. If you make one business card, that card is going to be really expensive. But if you order 500 business cards, the cost of one card is not so much. So you think about it like any printing. But also, if you use different images, it can be really cost effective. If you're lucky enough to have the same size and shapes panels in your project, you can play around with a few images. You repeat them and you can repeat them in a random order like here, and nobody would actually react on this. That is a repeating pattern. It looks like it's all bespoke, like a piece of art. So it's good to remember that don't Don't make too much if you don't need to. Here, definitely every image would not need to be different because you can't really notice it. Here's an example of one of those. Here's 5 different trees, I think. Yes, this is a freeway, like a noise wall by a freeway in Finland. And here's 5 different originals and just repeat it. And this is a very, very long wall, but you wouldn't say like, oh, looks like a repeating pattern. It looks like it would be all bespoke. This is a nice example, I think. Here's another little thing you can consider, or you should know that since the membrane is just a paper, you can turn it in the form. You can turn it upside down 180 degrees, and then you have kind of a different image, even though you have the exact same membrane. Like in this project from Australia, they made one segment and then they turned it upside down, and then they made another segment and turned that upside down. Because already having one copy extra would take down the cost a lot. This is an extremely smart architect did this job, I think. This took a lot of brain work, but ended up very nice. This is how it looks. It's a shopping mall in Australia, as I said. When you design your own image or pattern, you should remember that we work with on and off, exposed or not. So in your image, you should have black and white. Black is exposed, white is the smooth. You can see here on these cows, you can see the concrete that was cast, and you can see the original image next to it. We work a lot with gray tones, but still it's good to remember that it's always just black or white. So the gray tones, they come because depending on the density of the dots or the size of the dots, you will have all these gray tones. But in your original that we get from you, we can have only 100% black or 100% white. Then another thing, that no line should be finer than 5 millimeters or 0.2 inches. We can go very low, but in the size of construction, that's like too small. If you go lower, it just becomes a blur. You can't really enjoy the pattern. It all becomes kind of gray and messy. So when you work on your screen, it's going to look big, but it's good. Go big. It's okay. Also, when you go up to this wall, it might seem like, oh, this is really big, this texture, but it's nice, even though you might not see it's a cow. It's a very interesting texture. Then when you move away a little bit, the image appears. And I think that is so cool with graphic concrete, that it's so interesting on different levels. One other thing that I wrote here is that the complexity of your design would affect the price. And that means, like, if you would have an image that goes swirling all over the facade, and it has to be exactly connecting with the next panel and very precise, and every panel is different, that's going to give the architect a lot of work, of course, to place that. But then also for the shop drawings, every panel needs a shop drawing exactly with the graphics, how to place it, how to cut the membrane, how to place the membrane. And in the factory, they really need to cut the membrane and place it in the correct form. So even though the membrane price doesn't change, it would be just the workload, as you know, the man hours put into the project. So if you can go like more simple, of course, that's good to remember that that's also a cost saving. I notice I talk a lot about cost savings. It's not because this is expensive, it's because we know that, I mean, it's the construction business. It's a fact. We need to be smart. When you think about your concrete color, you can go very discreet. If you don't want it to show, you have the same colored aggregate and cement, like here with this white, very subtle, very elegant. If you want to show something that you should see it from afar, it should be poof, really coming on to you, then it's a dark aggregate and a light cement. Big contrast, like a logotype, you would have to see that, otherwise it would be kind of lost. Or if you have a photographical image, then you need those gray tones, so you need to have a big contrast between the aggregate and the cement. Here, when this is a very important thing also, if you use pigments, you should remember that you should keep the aggregate lighter. No, sorry, forget that. Aggregate darker than the smooth cement. That would give you the best result. Here you can see those indicators. They are on, showing aggregate color is the same in these both panels, because you can't color stone. It's just a gray aggregate. But then in the left panel, they put in black pigment and put in a little bit too much because it became too dark. You totally lose the contrast. You totally lose the image. So Be careful with the pigments. Don't use too much if you use them. So make sure that the aggregate always stays darker than the smooth cement. You can test your design by printing. You don't need to cast whatever little options you have. You don't need to cast a slab of everything. It would be really expensive to make a membrane, ship the membrane, make the panel, and have you review it for every little change you make. So print it or plot it in scale, step back and take a look. It's going to give you a very, very accurate kind of picture of what you're doing. Then, since you're working with a local factory, when it comes to choosing colors and aggregate, then they can make you like smaller samples like you see here, just for you to get the right color, texture on, color of the stone and color of cement. Maybe you have pigment, then you need to work with the chosen precaster, because every factory can have a little bit different pigments, aggregates, cements. But in order to see the big picture, it's good to print. And most of the factories we work with, they would actually have membranes in stock. So they would be pretty fast making these small color samples, because they can use a similar image. Doesn't need to be exactly what you're working with. So now if you take a look at those printed ones, and here you can see the final result, it looks pretty much exactly the same. It's important to remember that your final result, it's a combination of the concrete mix and the pattern. Like you can see here, you have a concrete mix with a gray stone, but even with the pattern, you can, the darkness, lightness, you can fine tune. How much do you expose? Do you expose the background? Do you expose the pattern? So there's so many options, but remember that it is a combination of these two. Here are some design examples. This is a housing building from Espoo outside Helsinki. Here they took in it's a kind of known textile artist who made this pattern. I think it's really nice because when you come up to it, it's like a beautiful, beautiful lace. And when you approach this building, you can't really see it. You see it as like grayish stripes. I think this is an excellent example of how graphic concrete is interesting on different levels. I mean, this could be wood or brick, but that wouldn't give you any level of surprise as you approach the building. Also, having a designer with a name making the pattern would kind of brand the whole building. So that's also quite popular, a popular way of making pattern or graphic concrete. Here's another nice way. You have graphic concrete on the concrete panels, and then you have silkscreen print with the same pattern on glass. If you would choose our patterns, we would give you actually the original. You could give that to the company making the glass. We would do that as long as you also have graphic concrete in your project. Here's another one. The same membrane was used for different houses in this project. The same membrane to keep it cost effective, but then changing the concrete mix. So there's one red house and one black house, and there's even a white house. And here they also printed the same pattern on the sunscreens. That's a nice detail. Here's a paver. This is very small because you're always close to a paver. You don't back away, you see it closely, so you can go into small detailing. This is a big facade, it's an archive, and I think this is a nice way to see that you could bring your design all the way to the facade. Here the architect took images from the documents that are stored inside these buildings and put that on the facade and made a pattern. There's like old maps, church books, and very interesting old documents. And here's also another very nice thing that you can see. There's like a light yard. I can show you here my cursor. Here's like a light yard. So actually one part of this black box would become an interior wall. That's also, I think, super cool. So I think this was my last slide. I hope you liked it, but I always also hope that you have some interesting questions for me now. Is there any questions, Bang?
Yes, Lena. First of all, thank you so much for your great presentation. I cannot wait to hear more.
Thank you.
Yes, but now it's the time to take a look at the question from the audience. Yes, the first question is about our GC collection pattern. So you have introduced it. We have provided lots of different pattern is available in our website. So is it hard to align GC collection patterns?
It depends on the pattern, actually. There are easier ones and harder ones. There are some that are just dots. They wouldn't have a direction, so you can kind of place them freely. Then, of course, if you have a line, You might have to align them from one panel to the other. And then there are the larger patterns that you can actually align perfectly if you want. But the thing is, with all these patterns, they don't need to be exactly aligned. Um, you even if you wouldn't align them exactly, they would work well.
Mm.
So if you are interested in a certain type of pattern, I mean, definitely we can help you find that pattern. There's all different kinds, and it's also up to you. You want to align them or not.
Okay, great. It sounds it's not too difficult.
No, we
No.
help you.
All right. Then maybe additional to that question and answer. So in case anyone need like the help about design consultation or service, could we provide it?
Yes, we can. We have design instructions on our website. I think those are fairly good, but of course, if you have a specific project or a specific question, our design consultancy is free of charge. So just go to the website and check the contacts. We have representatives in a lot of places all over the globe. So you find your local contact and you just contact them with your question and they would help you. And and of course, if you would like to have a bespoke pattern, like something that would be only for you, we can design a pattern for you. Of course, that there would be a cost, but just to tell us what you would like, and we will help you.
Hmm. It's good to hear that we are willing to help our customers, right?
Yes, yes, we are.
Yes. All right. Okay. Then Lena, there might be two more questions.
Okay.
Yeah. So one question is about the size of the aggregation. So is it needed to use a fine aggregate or is there a maximum diameter of the stones?
Okay, that depends a lot on the type of concrete because this can be used with different types of concrete. If you have a glass fiber reinforced, very thin board, you can have very fine like sand. But if you go with a traditional heavy concrete, we suggest that you have a what is called a continuing graduation curve. You should have small, medium, and large stones, all in a mix in order to make a homogeneous look. Um, Important is that all those stones, finer sands, and larger aggregates should have the same color. Otherwise, your result can be spotted. So it's good to know that a continuing curve and the same color would be preferable, but of course it depends on the look. Again, if you would like to have like dots of darker stones, of course that can be made. But it depends so much on the type of panel and a type of concrete mix. Of course, what comes first is the technical aspects of the concrete. It needs to be the right quality. So that is also a thing that would be determined by the mix and the size of the aggregates.
Hmm. Okay. It sounds like it's too much like a technological side.
A precaster will help you.
That's nice. Yeah, to additional information, like we also provide a list of the precaster in our website. So if they need a contact of the precaster, we can also help, and they can also find in our website.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So now this might be the last question, Lena.
Okay.
So what about the size of the image? Because I heard that our membrane is like a 3.2 meter width is the maximum. But what about like could we print a big pattern image exceeding 3.2 meter?
Yes, we can. If your image would be so big that it wouldn't fit on the membrane, we would print it in parts. And that's a thing that the designer doesn't really need to worry about because we would take that with the concrete manufacturer. We would talk to them and figure out the best way to divide the image on the membrane. If it would be divided on many panels, we would divide it accordingly. But if the panel is so big that it won't fit on one piece of membrane, then at the factory they can actually combine two membranes and have a membrane being large enough. But that's something we do with a precaster, and so the answer is yes.
Yes, great.
Yes.
All sounds is possible.
Yes.
Okay, Lena, that was the last question, but let's make our audience surprised. Could you pick the best question today?
Yes, I could. I think it was probably the first one with the aligning because I
Mm-hmm.
noticed that I could do kind of a seminar on that too. I didn't. So, okay, the surprise. You are going to get a graphic concrete t-shirt. Here you see it. This one,
Yes.
nice. So if you find me, Lena Wexström, at our website, you send me a mail with your name, address, and size, and I will send you one t-shirt in the mail. That was a really good question. I'm stupid for forgetting that. Thank you.
Thanks, Lena, choosing the best question. And then,
Thank you.
okay, yeah, all right. Okay, now we are closing our live webinar today. So,
Thank you. I'm sorry I'm asleep here.
no. Okay, so after the event today, we would like to share this recorded live webinar video so you can watch it again and then also share with your um, customers or partners or colleagues. So also, like if you can have not heard anything from us by this week, then you can also find this video request form in our website. So please find the page Graphic Concrete Live Webinar, and then you will find a place to get the live video link. And then I would like to remind you that next week, same time, Thursday, November 12th at 3 p.m., you're gonna hear the part 3. So please mark on your calendar. Don't forget about it. Yes. And we also provide lots of tailor-made presentation and trainings and meetings for you. So if you have any difficulties on your timetable, please feel free to contact us. Okay, thank you so much once again to join us today, and then hope to see you next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.